This just in. Freaky blue baby seen floating above the town of Midwich. Well, hey everybody, it's Justin here at This Just In. How you doing? I know it's been a little while. I did about a week of tag videos and then I was quiet for a little bit, but I'm back now and I figured it was about time I get around to a book review, since that's what I'm here for, is to bring you some book reviews. So here we are. I am going to review a book that I read with Sandy at Ms. Reads a Lot. We did a buddy read on this one. She saw me bring this book up in a book haul video, and she jumped at the chance because this book was on her list of 1001 books to read before you die, and also she was eager to do a buddy read with good old Justin. So the book we read together was The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. I had a good time with the buddy read. Really glad that I did it. I was a little bit nervous at first, but she led the way. She led the discussion, and we talked a lot about this book and had some interesting things to say about it. And I opened up my brand new Voxer account. That was really exciting to get that. But yeah, I had a great time. Thank you very much, Sandy, for doing the buddy read with me, and I hope you're having fun on your vacation. So anyway, on to The Midwich Cuckoos. So The Midwich Cuckoos, I stumbled across this. Isn't this cover fantastic? I think I mentioned it before, but it's worth pointing out again. I came across this in a bookstore, of course, a bookstore. It was on a shelf full of vintage paperback books, and they were all, wrapped in plastic. So was this one, but I took it out so I could read it. And I was very taken by the cover. This hilarious baby floating above the town with its glowing golden eyes. I thought it was a pretty cool cover. And of course I remembered that Juan at Plagued by Visions had reviewed this book, and we all know that anything he reads, I'm bound to read. So I picked it up, snatched it up right away. Cover, Juan, I'm in. All right. So The Midwich Cuckoos was released in 1957, written by John Wyndham. John Wyndham is an English science fiction author. He wrote a lot of stories that in the 30s that were released in some science fiction magazines. And then he served in World War II. He participated in some landings at Normandy. He didn't participate in D-Day. He landed a few days afterwards, but he did participate in World War II. He did serve some time there. And his experiences there affected him greatly. And in fact, the bulk of his most well-known work was written and released after World War II, during that post-war period, including The Day of the Triffids and Midwich Cuckoos. You can see some of his influence in Day of the Triffids. Some of his experiences in the war are revealed some in Day of the Triffids, a book which I DNF'd, regrettably so. And I do plan to get back to it. I had some nonsense going on in my life at the time that made it just not really wanting to read. But especially after having read this, I am eager to get back to Day of the Triffids as well. So on to the book itself. Now, I think I mentioned this before. I often struggle with how much of a story, how much of a plot to reveal when I'm talking about a book, because in some ways, I think the blind experience of having the story unfold and the events unravel before you, and following the twists and turns without knowing what's coming is one of sometimes the best way to experience a book. And it particularly seemed to be the case that the way this was written was that we weren't meant to know exactly what was to happen. But by this point, we might know the story already. You may know the book more from its film version, The Village of the Damned, which there were two versions of it with that name, I believe. Oh, I should have researched that a little bit here, but I think there was a version of it released in the 60s called Village of the Damned, the same story. I haven't seen that movie, nor did I see John Carpenter's remake, which I believe was released in the 90s. I really should have looked at that a little bit before recording this, but here we are. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about the plot, because if I don't, I won't have much to talk about, will I? So, The Midwich Cuckoos, of course, takes place in the fictional town of Midwich, England. It's a small town, village, not much happens there, but except for, the events that are in this book, of course. One day, the town of Midwich goes quiet, and people calling into the town don't get any answers on the phone. Any communication, radio communication, anybody that they might normally talk with inside the town is quiet. And some people are sent into the town to say, hey, what's going on? But the people that are sent into the town, they don't come back out. And it's very strange, and soon find that anybody that's in the village, in the town of Midwich, has fallen asleep. And in fact, it seems to have happened. There's a specific perimeter around the town in which if you cross that line, you will faint or fall asleep. And in fact, at the center of that perimeter, there's a mysterious silver object. And after about a day or so, that object disappears, and the people that are within that perimeter start to wake up. And, that was kind of weird, right? Everybody fell asleep, not sure what happened there. They end up calling this the day out. But eventually, we find that all of the women of childbearing age in the town of Midwich are pregnant. And in fact, some of the women that are pregnant had no reason to be pregnant. So it's very, very odd, very mysterious. And eventually, children are born from these pregnancies. And the children are very unusual. They have silvery skin, platinum blonde hair, and these golden glowing eyes. All of them look very much the same. All of them have these same features. And as they grow, we come to find that they are telepathic. They can communicate with each other, and they can control people with their telepathic abilities. And also they are growing at a strangely accelerated rate, in which by the time they're, I believe, 7 or 8, they appear to be twice that age. So the Midwich Cuckoos is one of the more thoughtful, dialogue-heavy science fiction novels I've read of late. Much of the action doesn't occur directly. You don't read about it directly in the narrative. A lot of it is recounted firsthand through certain figureheads of the town, through certain leaders of the town. And it's interesting, that the people who suffer the most, the people who are most directly affected, at least at first, by this invasion, the women who have been violated, are pregnant and having to deal with the fact that this happened to them. We don't get a lot from them, which is kind of too bad, but it might have been a completely different novel if we had experienced that, something more visceral maybe and more emotional. But instead we get this removed kind of discussion about what's happening and how to handle things. And when we're seeing these conversations occur between these different figureheads of the town, we have the vicar, I think we have a doctor, and we have the author, this writer rather, who seems to be the main character, Zellaby. So we get a lot of discussion amongst them and a couple of other people, but not a lot from the women as far as what they're experiencing, which is too bad, because they are greatly affected by what's going on, of course, but they are kept at arm's length, more or less. So we get a lot of discussions from these main characters, these figureheads, and their philosophies inform a lot of the discussions and a lot of how they view what's happening and how they plan to deal with what's going on with these children and how they're growing and what they're doing, and through these discussions and eventually through discussions with the children, a lot of the philosophies of major world governments are brought into question, and their effectiveness with dealing with this situation, with dealing with this threat. Flaws in Western democracy are brought to light, and so the conflict between left and right, and how any discussion or any attempt to formulate some kind of plan to deal with this threat would be halted. And a lot of that stems from the fact that this threat appears to be children, and that would, the moral dilemma of dealing with that would bring any sort of planning of this to cope with this threat, would bring it to a halt. And this is part of the brilliance of the story, is how the threat from within, instead of being this external threat, and how this threat from within is more insidious and even a larger threat than this obvious, violent invasion from outside. So it's interesting to me. It seems like we're talking about a representation of maybe a disconnect between generations, between an older and a younger generation, and just this inability to understand this younger generation, and maybe not quite coming to terms with the power that a younger generation might have, and the kind of a threat they might be towards the older generation. And it's also coming to this as a parent of a teenager. I feel that as well on a somewhat of a personal level, is this kind of disconnect between this creature that lives in my house that has their way to control me, and control things that happen in the house in such a way that can sometimes feel like a threat. So yeah, some very interesting ideas and thoughts coming from this book, which I appreciate and find a little unsettling and scary on its own. I also think it's kind of interesting that the just around the corner from when this book was written, and not too far on down the road, was the counterculture of the 60s, and that was very much led by the youth of the time, and at least as I understand how the older generation responded to that. So Midwich Cuckoos, I would recommend this. If I was to give this a star rating, I would give this maybe a 4 out of 5 glowing gold baby eyes, the Midwich Cuckoos. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed my review. Coming up soon, next I hope to have a review of The Wasp Factory, which I buddy read with Mr. Morningstar. We buddy read this a little short while ago. I greatly enjoyed this book and look forward to bringing another review to you, this time of The Wasp Factory. Again, want to thank Sandy for doing the buddy read with me, and hope she's having fun on her vacation. I think with that, I'll be signing off. Good evening, good night. Thank you very much.
Justin, I don't think you got this book at all. That was just a lot of rambling nonsense. You're going to regret the things you said.